I never thought I'd be telling this story about Oliver, but here we are. What happens when a 63-year-old widower with two grown children and a comfortable retirement fund meets a 28-year-old Thai woman who calls him her soulmate? You might think you know where this is going, but trust me, you don't. By the time Oliver realized what was happening, it was already too late. His children weren't speaking to him. His bank accounts were empty, and the woman he'd rewritten his entire will for had vanished into thin air. But that's just where the story begins to get truly dark. Before we dive into this cautionary tale that will make you question everything you think you know about love and trust, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You're going to want to follow along as we unpack one of the most devastating cons I've ever witnessed firsthand. I met Oliver Grant 3 years ago at our local beach volleyball court in Santa Monica. He was this distinguished British gentleman who'd moved to California after his wife Margaret passed from cancer. Tall, silver-haired, with those kind eyes that made you trust him instantly. Oliver had spent 35 years building a successful architectural firm in London, raised 2 kids who were now in their 30s, and had what most people would call a perfect life. Until Margaret died, and suddenly that perfect life felt like an empty shell. Oliver wasn't the type to wallow in self-pity. After the funeral, after watching his children James and Sarah return to their own busy lives, he made a decision that surprised everyone. He sold the family home in Hampstead, liquidated most of his business assets, and moved to Los Angeles. I need to remember how to live again, he told me that first day we played volleyball together. He had this infectious laugh and a way of making everyone around him feel lighter. You could see he was grieving, but he was fighting it with everything he had. For 2 years, Oliver threw himself into his new life. He bought a beautiful craftsman house in Venice Beach, started a small consulting business, and became a regular at our weekend volleyball games. He dated occasionally, nothing serious, just dinner and theater with age-appropriate women from his wine-tasting club. His children visited for holidays. He seemed to be healing, finding his footing in this new chapter. I remember thinking how well he was handling his grief, how he was choosing life over despair. Then came that February morning when Oliver announced he was taking a trip to Thailand. Just 2 weeks, he said, to clear my head and maybe do some photography. He'd always been interested in architecture and wanted to document some of the temples in Bangkok and Phuket. It seemed like a healthy adventure for a man who'd spent the last 2 years rebuilding himself. We all wished him well, told him to send pictures, the usual send-off for a friend's vacation. He came back 3 weeks later, and I knew immediately something had changed. There was this glow about him, this energy that reminded me of a teenager with his first crush. I met someone, he said, and the way he said it made my stomach drop, not because I wasn't happy for him, but because there was something desperate in his voice. Something that sounded more like need than love. Her name was Tanya Pon, and according to Oliver, she was the most beautiful, intelligent, caring woman he'd ever met. She was 28, worked as a tour guide in Phuket, spoke perfect English, and had apparently fallen head over heels for this British architect old enough to be her father. Oliver showed us pictures on his phone, and I have to admit, she was stunning. Long black hair, delicate features, a smile that could light up a room. But something about those photos bothered me, though I couldn't put my finger on what. Oliver talked about her constantly, how she'd shown him hidden temples that tourists never see, how she'd cooked traditional Thai meals for him in her small apartment. how she told him about her dreams of starting her own tour company, but couldn't get the funding, how she'd cried when he had to leave, begging him not to forget her. Within a month of returning to LA, Oliver was planning his next trip to Thailand. Don't you think it's a bit fast? I asked him one afternoon as we grabbed coffee after volleyball. I mean, you barely know her. Oliver's response was swift and defensive. Age doesn't matter when you connect with someone on a soul level, he said. Tanya understands me in ways Margaret never did. She sees who I really am beneath all the grief and British stuffiness. That should have been my first real red flag. Oliver had loved Margaret deeply, and hearing him diminish that relationship for someone he'd known for 2 weeks was completely out of character. But Oliver was my friend, and I wanted him to be happy, so I kept my concerns to myself. The second trip to Thailand lasted a month. Oliver came back even more infatuated, talking about how Tanya Porn had introduced him to her family, how her elderly mother had blessed their relationship, how the local community had embraced him as one of their own. He showed us videos of temple ceremonies where he and Tanya Porn were dressed in traditional Thai clothing, looking for all the world like a couple deeply in love. But here's where things started to get strange, and I want you to pause the video right now and think about this. Write in the comments what seems suspicious to you about this story so far, because I guarantee you're picking up on the same red flags that I was too polite or too hopeful to voice at the time. Oliver's third trip to Thailand wasn't a vacation anymore. It was a reconnaissance mission for a permanent move. He came back talking about buying property in Phuket, about starting a business there, about how much cheaper and more meaningful life could be in Thailand. The American dream is a myth, he told us. Real happiness is about simplicity, community, authentic relationships. This from a man who'd spent his entire career building luxury homes for wealthy clients in London. The change in Oliver was dramatic and concerning. He started criticizing everything about his life in America. His house was too big, too expensive, too isolated. His consulting work was meaningless. His children were too busy with their careers to really care about him. Even our volleyball games became something he complained about, calling them shallow entertainment for aging men who refused to grow up. Tanya Porn, meanwhile, had become the solution to all of life's problems. She was teaching him meditation and Buddhist philosophy. She was helping him understand what really mattered in life. She was showing him how to live authentically instead of hiding behind material possessions and social expectations. I started noticing that every conversation with Oliver somehow led back to money. How expensive everything was in America compared to Thailand. How his retirement savings could last twice as long there. How Tanya Porn had found the perfect piece of land for them to build a house together. But the seller wanted cash up front and wouldn't wait for Oliver to gradually liquidate his American assets. Then came the requests, small at first. Could Oliver help Tanya Porn's mother with her medical bills? Could he assist with her younger brother's school fees? Could he provide a loan for her friend's wedding expenses? Oliver was happy to help, of course. These weren't huge amounts. A few $1,000s here and there. And he could afford it. Plus, he explained, in Thai culture, taking care of your partner's family was expected and honorable. By his fourth trip to Thailand that year, Oliver had made a decision that shocked everyone who knew him. He was selling his house in Venice Beach and moving to Phuket permanently. Not just moving, but transferring all his assets to Thailand to avoid double taxation and currency conversion fees. Tanya Porn had found him an excellent local attorney who could handle everything efficiently and legally. His children, James and Sarah, were devastated. They flew to Los Angeles together to stage what amounted to an intervention. I was there for part of it, and it was heartbreaking to watch. James, who was a lawyer himself, tried to explain the risks of transferring assets internationally without proper legal protection. Sarah, tears streaming down her face, begged her father to slow down, to think about what he was doing. "You barely know her, Dad," Sarah pleaded. "You've spent maybe 3 months total with this woman, and you're giving up everything for her?" Oliver's response was cold and final. "You children have your own lives, your own families. You visit twice a year and call once a week if I'm lucky. Tanya loves me unconditionally. She wants to build a life with me, not just check in when it's convenient." The words hit like a physical blow. I watched James and Sarah exchange looks of pure anguish. These were good kids who loved their father. But they had careers and young children and lived on different continents. They'd been trying to balance supporting their grieving father with their own responsibilities. And now they were being punished for not being available enough. "Dad, please," James said, "just wait 6 months. Come home. Think about it. Talk to a therapist. If you still want to move to Thailand after that, we'll support you." But Oliver was past listening. He accused his children of being selfish, of wanting to keep him miserable and alone so they could inherit his money someday. He said Tanya Porn had warned him that his family would try to sabotage their relationship out of jealousy and greed. That conversation ended with James and Sarah leaving in tears, and Oliver more determined than ever to prove his independence by moving forward with his plans. The house sold quickly in LA's hot real estate market. Oliver converted everything to cash and wire transfers, working with Tanya Porn's recommended financial advisors to move his money to Thai banks. He gave up his American consulting clients, sold his car, donated most of his possessions to charity. Within 6 months, Oliver Grant had erased his entire American life. I helped him pack his final boxes, and I'll never forget how excited he was. "This is what courage looks like," he told me. "Most people are too afraid to take real risks, to choose love over security. I'm finally free." He promised to stay in touch, to send pictures of his new life, to invite us all to visit once he and Tanya Porn got settled. The last thing he said to me was, "You'll see. In a year, you'll all understand why I did this." For the first few months, Oliver's emails and photos seemed to confirm his happiness. He and Tanya Porn had found a beautiful rental house near the beach in Phuket. He was studying Thai language and culture. They were looking at land to buy and talking about starting a small resort business together. He sent pictures of temple visits, local festivals, romantic dinners on the beach. But gradually, the communications became less frequent and more vague. When I asked specific questions about his day-to-day life or his business plans, Oliver's responses were brief and evasive. He stopped sending pictures of himself, only scenic shots of beaches and sunsets. Then, about 8 months after his move, I got a phone call that chilled me to the bone. "Make sure you're subscribed to this channel, because what happens next will make you question everything you think you know about trust and manipulation. And leave a comment telling me if you've ever seen anything like this happen to someone you know." Because unfortunately, Oliver's story is far from unique. Oliver's voice on that international call was barely recognizable. Gone was the confident, joyful man who'd been so excited about his new life. This Oliver sounded hollow, defeated, maybe even scared. "I think I've made a terrible mistake," he whispered, as if afraid someone might overhear. "Can I tell you something in confidence?" The story that poured out over the next hour was devastating. The beautiful rental house near the beach? It belonged to Tanya Porn's cousin, and Oliver had been paying triple the local rate for what turned out to be a property with serious structural problems and no legal rental permits. The land they'd been planning to buy, it was in a flood zone with disputed ownership that no legitimate business would touch. The local attorney who'd helped transfer his assets, he'd disappeared, along with his office, just 2 weeks after Oliver's money hit the Thai banks. But the worst part wasn't the money. Though Oliver had lost nearly $200,000 in various scams and overcharges, the worst part was Tanya Porn herself. The caring, devoted girlfriend had become controlling and manipulative almost the moment Oliver committed fully to the relationship. She monitored his communications with family and friends, claiming that maintaining ties to his old life showed he wasn't truly committed to their future together. She had tantrums when he wanted to explore Phuket on his own, insisting that as a foreigner, he needed her protection and guidance for everything. "I can't even go to the grocery store without her," Oliver told me. "She says the vendors will cheat me, that I don't understand Thai culture well enough to function independently. But I think she's just afraid I'll talk to other expats and realize how abnormal this situation has become." The loving family that had welcomed him so warmly, they'd become a constant drain on his finances. Tanya Porn's mother needed surgery. Her brother needed bail money for a gambling debt. Her cousin's business was failing and needed an emergency loan. There was always a crisis, always a reason why Oliver needed to provide more money to prove his commitment to the family. "Every time I hesitate or ask questions, Tanya starts crying," Oliver said. "She tells me I don't really love her, that I'm just like all the other foreign men who come to Thailand looking for young women to use and abandon. She threatens to leave, to end the relationship, and I panic and give her whatever she wants." Oliver had tried to contact James and Sarah several times, but Tanya Porn always found reasons to interrupt or delay the calls. His phone had mysteriously developed problems with international calling. The internet connection at their house was unreliable. When he suggested going to an internet cafe to video chat with his children, Tanya Porn became hysterical, accusing him of planning to leave her for his family. "I think she's been reading my emails," Oliver confided, "and I know she's taken money from my accounts without asking. She has access to everything because I trusted her to help me navigate the banking system here." The isolation was complete and intentional. Oliver realized he'd been cut off from every support system, every independent source of information, every relationship that predated Tanya Porn. He was financially and emotionally dependent on a woman who seemed determined to keep him that way. "I want to come home," he said finally, and the defeat in his voice broke my heart. "But I don't know how. She controls the money. She has my passport for safekeeping. She's convinced everyone here that I'm her fiancé and that we're planning to get married soon. If I try to leave, she threatens suicide. If I try to contact my children directly, she says I'm betraying our relationship." This was textbook psychological manipulation, financial abuse, and probably criminal fraud. But Oliver was trapped by his own pride and shame as much as by Tanya Porn's control tactics. How do you admit to your family that you were so wrong, so foolish, that you destroyed your life for someone who was conning you from the beginning? I convinced Oliver to give me his children's contact information so I could reach out to them directly. James and Sarah were heartbroken, but not surprised. They'd been trying to reach their father for months, growing increasingly worried about his vague emails and cancelled video calls. "We knew something was wrong," Sarah told me, "but Dad had made it clear that if we didn't support his relationship with Tanya Porn, we weren't welcome in his life. We were afraid that pushing too hard would drive him away completely. Together, We developed a plan to help Oliver escape. James flew to Thailand under the pretense of wanting to meet Tanya Porn and give his blessing to their relationship. Meanwhile, Sarah worked with international lawyers to freeze Oliver's remaining accounts and investigate the financial fraud. What James discovered in Phuket was even worse than we'd imagined. Oliver had lost weight, looked years older, and was clearly afraid of Tanya Porn's reaction to his son's visit. The house they were living in was run down and isolated. Oliver wasn't allowed to go anywhere alone, wasn't permitted to have money in his own pocket, and jumped nervously whenever Tanya Porn spoke to him in Thai. But the most shocking discovery came when James hired a local private investigator to look into Tanya Porn's background. She wasn't a tour guide struggling to make ends meet. She was part of an organized network that specifically targeted older Western men, particularly widowers with significant assets and adult children living far away. Oliver wasn't her first victim. Over the past 5 years, Tanya Porn had been in similar relationships with at least 3 other men: a retired German engineer, an American businessman, and a Canadian teacher. Each relationship had followed the same pattern: intense romance, isolation from family and friends, gradual financial control, and eventual abandonment once the victim's resources were exhausted. The German engineer had lost his entire pension. The American businessman had mortgaged his house and liquidated his retirement accounts before Tanya Porn disappeared. The Canadian teacher had suffered a nervous breakdown and was still struggling to rebuild his life 2 years later. Armed with this information, James confronted Tanya Porn directly. While Oliver was at a mandatory visa appointment, she'd insisted he attend alone. The conversation was brief and revealing. "Your father is a lonely old man who was easy to manipulate," she said with cold indifference. "He wanted to feel young and important again, and I gave him that fantasy. He paid for the privilege, just like the others." When pressed about the specific frauds and thefts, Tanya Porn was unrepentant. "He gave me that money willingly. He signed the papers. He authorized the transfers. He chose to trust me with his accounts. No court will convict me for accepting gifts from a man who was trying to buy love." She was probably right about the legal aspects. Oliver had indeed authorized most of the financial transactions, and proving coercion or fraud in an international case would be nearly impossible. But James recorded the conversation, and Tanya Porn's casual admission of manipulation provided the evidence Oliver needed to finally see the truth. The confrontation between Oliver and Tanya Porn that evening was explosive. Years of suppressed doubts and growing fear finally erupted as Oliver demanded answers about the other victims, the lies about her background, and the systematic theft of his assets. Tanya Porn's response was to escalate her manipulation tactics. She claimed she was pregnant with Oliver's child. She threatened suicide if he tried to leave her. She said her family would be dishonored and that her cousins would seek revenge against Oliver and his son. But Oliver had finally reached his breaking point. With James there for support, he found the courage to call her bluff. "I'm leaving," he said simply. "Tomorrow, James has booked us flights back to London, and I'm done with all of this." Tanya Porn's reaction was swift and vicious. She called the local police, claiming that Oliver had been physically abusing her and was now trying to flee the country to avoid prosecution. She produced bruises on her arms that she claimed were from Oliver's violence, though James suspected they were self-inflicted. The next 12 hours were a nightmare of bureaucracy, bribery, and fear. Oliver and James were detained by police who seemed more interested in extracting payment than investigating the truth. Tanya Porn had clearly done this before and knew exactly which officials to contact and how much money would be required to complicate their departure. It cost Oliver another $20,000 in administrative fees and legal consultations to clear the false charges and obtain permission to leave the country. Even then, they had to abandon most of Oliver's remaining possessions and leave Thailand immediately. The flight back to London was the longest of Oliver's life. He sat in stunned silence for most of the journey, processing the magnitude of what had happened to him. He'd lost nearly $400,000. His relationship with his children had been damaged, and his confidence in his own judgment was shattered. But perhaps the most devastating realization was that everything Tanya Porn had said and done was calculated manipulation designed to extract maximum financial benefit before discarding him like the others. "I keep thinking about things she said," Oliver told me weeks later during a video call from London. Little comments about how Western men were all the same, how they expected too much from Thai women, how she'd been hurt before by foreigners who abandoned their promises. I thought she was being vulnerable and sharing her pain with me. Now I realize she was probably describing her previous victims and testing my reactions. The recovery process was slow and painful. Oliver had lost more than money. He'd lost faith in his ability to read people, to make good decisions, to trust his own instincts. The shame was overwhelming, not just about the financial losses, but about how completely he'd been fooled. His children, to their credit, rallied around him despite the pain he'd caused them. James helped Oliver find a therapist who specialized in fraud victims and emotional manipulation. Sarah flew to London and stayed for 2 weeks, helping her father navigate the practical aspects of rebuilding his life from nothing. "We're not angry, Dad," Sarah told him. "We're just grateful you're alive and safe. Money can be earned again, but we can't replace you." Oliver moved in with James temporarily while he figured out his next steps. The proud, independent man who'd once owned a successful business and a beautiful home was now sleeping in his son's spare bedroom, dependent on his children for basic necessities. The role reversal was humbling and painful, but it also began to heal the relationship damage from the previous year. Through therapy, Oliver began to understand how Tanya Porn's manipulation had worked. She'd identified his vulnerabilities perfectly: his grief over Margaret's death, his fear of growing old alone, his desire to feel needed and important again. Every aspect of their relationship had been designed to exploit those emotional wounds. "Predators like Tanya Porn are experts at reading people," his therapist explained. "They can identify loneliness, grief, and insecurity from across a room. They know exactly what to say to make their victims feel special, chosen, understood in ways they've never been before." The therapeutic process was difficult because it required Oliver to confront not just Tanya Porn's deception, but his own role in enabling it. He'd ignored red flags, dismissed his children's concerns, and chosen to believe what he wanted to hear rather than what the evidence suggested. "I was so desperate to feel alive again after Margaret died," Oliver admitted during one of our video calls. "Tanya Porn made me feel like I was 25 years old, like I was this adventurous romantic figure instead of just a sad widower. I didn't want to look too closely at the reality, because the fantasy was so much better than my actual life." 6 months after his escape from Thailand, Oliver got a call that would change everything once more. It was from Detective Sarah Chen with the International Crimes Division of Scotland Yard. The private investigator James had hired in Thailand had been working with law enforcement across multiple countries to build a case against Tanya Porn's criminal network. Mr. Grant, Detective Chen said, "We need your help to stop this from happening to other people." It turned out that Oliver's case had become the key to unraveling a sophisticated international fraud operation. Tanya Porn wasn't just a solo scammer. She was part of an organized network that had been operating across Southeast Asia for over a decade. The network included corrupt officials, fake lawyers, fraudulent businesses, and multiple women who specialized in targeting different demographics of Western victims. The evidence James had gathered, combined with testimony from other victims who'd finally found the courage to come forward, was enough to pursue criminal charges in multiple jurisdictions. But they needed Oliver to testify, to go on record about exactly what had happened to him. "I know it's asking a lot," Detective Chen said. "Testifying means your story will become public record, but your case is the strongest we have, and your testimony could prevent this network from destroying other families." Oliver's decision to cooperate with law enforcement became a turning point in his recovery. Instead of being just a victim, he was choosing to be part of the solution. He spent weeks working with investigators, providing detailed accounts of every financial transaction, every manipulation tactic, every lie he'd been told. The investigation revealed the staggering scope of the operation. Over 15 years, Tanya Porn's network had stolen an estimated $12 million from more than 60 victims across North America, Europe, and Australia. Most victims had been too ashamed to report the crimes, allowing the network to operate with impunity. Oliver's testimony was delivered via video link to avoid the expense and risk of traveling back to Thailand. Watching him recount his story to the court was both heartbreaking and inspiring. He spoke clearly and honestly about his mistakes, his vulnerabilities, and the systematic way he'd been manipulated and robbed. "I want other people to understand that this can happen to anyone," Oliver said during his testimony. "I was an educated, successful businessman with loving children and good friends. I thought I was too smart to fall for something like this. But grief and loneliness can make you vulnerable in ways you never expect." 3 months later, Detective Chen called, with news that felt like justice finally being served. Tanya Porn and 5 other members of her network had been arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud, money laundering, and criminal conspiracy. The corrupt officials who'd helped them had been suspended pending investigation. Several of the fake businesses used in their schemes had been shut down. More importantly, authorities had frozen accounts containing over $2 million in stolen funds. While the legal process would take years, there was hope that at least some victims might recover a portion of their losses. Oliver wouldn't get most of his money back, but something more valuable had been restored: his sense of purpose and self-worth. He'd taken a terrible experience and used it to protect other people. He'd found the courage to speak truth publicly about his mistakes and vulnerabilities. The media attention from the case was intense, but mostly positive. Oliver did interviews with newspapers and television programs, always emphasizing the same message: love scams can happen to anyone. Shame keeps victims silent, and reporting these crimes is essential to stopping them. "If sharing my story prevents even one person from going through what I experienced," Oliver said during a BBC interview, "then maybe this whole nightmare will have been worth something." But the real surprise came 8 months later. At a victim support group meeting, Oliver had started attending in London. The group met weekly and included people who'd been targeted by various types of romance and financial scams. Oliver had become something of an informal leader, helping newcomers process their experiences and navigate the recovery process. That's where he met Elizabeth Morrison, a 55-year-old teacher who'd lost £30,000 to a fake online romance with someone claiming to be an American soldier deployed overseas. Elizabeth was intelligent, funny, and refreshingly honest about her own mistakes and vulnerabilities. I knew it was probably too good to be true, she told the group during her first meeting. But I'd been divorced for 10 years. My children lived in different cities, and this man made me feel beautiful and desired again. I kept thinking, what if it's real? What if I'm throwing away my chance at love because I'm too cynical? Oliver found himself drawn to Elizabeth's combination of wisdom and vulnerability. She wasn't trying to forget her painful experience or pretend it hadn't happened. Instead, she was using it to build stronger boundaries and better self-awareness. Their friendship developed slowly and naturally. They started having coffee after group meetings, then dinner occasionally, then weekend walks in Hyde Park. There was no rushing, no pressure, no dramatic declarations of instant soulmate connections. We're both wounded, Oliver told me during one of our calls, but we're healing in healthy ways, with full knowledge of each other's histories and limitations. It's the opposite of what happened with Tanya Pone, and that feels like the biggest victory of all. Elizabeth had met Oliver's children and been warmly welcomed into the family. James and Sarah were cautious but supportive, impressed by Elizabeth's intelligence and her obvious positive influence on their father. She challenges him without manipulating him, Sarah observed. She encourages his independence instead of fostering dependence. It's like watching Dad remember who he really is. A year after meeting Elizabeth, Oliver had rebuilt his life in ways that surprised everyone, including himself. He'd started a small consulting business, helping other scam victims navigate the legal and financial recovery process. He'd written a book about his experience that became a bestseller and raised awareness about international romance fraud. Most importantly, he'd learned to trust himself again while maintaining healthy skepticism about people's motives. He'd found love again, but this time it was built on honesty, mutual respect, and genuine compatibility rather than fantasy and manipulation. The final chapter of Oliver's story came 2 years after his escape from Thailand. Detective Chen called to tell him that Tanya Pone had been convicted and sentenced to 12 years in prison. Several other network members had received similar sentences, and the investigation had expanded to include authorities in 6 countries. Your testimony was crucial to this outcome, Detective Chen said. The judge specifically mentioned your courage in coming forward when she handed down the sentence. Oliver felt a complex mix of emotions about Tanya Pone's conviction. There was satisfaction that justice had been served and relief that she couldn't hurt anyone else. But there was also sadness for the waste of it all, for the lives destroyed by greed and manipulation. I don't hate her, Oliver told me. I pity her. What kind of life must she have lived to become someone who could look into another person's eyes, claim to love them, and systematically destroy them for money? She's in prison now, but in many ways, she was already imprisoned by whatever made her capable of that kind of cruelty. Today, Oliver Grant is 71 years old and happier than he's been since Margaret died. He lives in a comfortable flat in London, close enough to his children to see them regularly, but independent enough to maintain his dignity. His relationship with Elizabeth continues to grow stronger, built on the solid foundation of mutual respect and shared experience. He still plays volleyball, though now it's with a senior league that meets twice a week in a community center. He still travels, though now he goes with Elizabeth and they research their destinations carefully together. He still seeks adventure and meaning, but he does it with wisdom earned through hard experience. The money Oliver lost will never be fully recovered, but he's learned that financial security means less than he once thought. His real wealth lies in his restored relationships with his children, his new love with Elizabeth, his sense of purpose in helping other victims, and his hard-won understanding of his own strengths and vulnerabilities. I spent my whole life thinking I was immune to being fooled, Oliver reflected during our last conversation. I was successful, educated, worldly. I thought those things protected me from making stupid mistakes. But the truth is, we're all vulnerable to manipulation when we're desperate enough for something. The key is learning to recognize that desperation and address it honestly instead of looking for magical solutions. Oliver's story serves as both a cautionary tale and a testament to human resilience. Yes, he made catastrophic mistakes that cost him hundreds of thousands of dollars and nearly destroyed his family relationships. But he also found the courage to escape, to seek help, to rebuild, and ultimately to use his experience to protect others. The criminals who targeted Oliver counted on his shame and silence to protect them from consequences. By choosing to speak publicly about what happened to him, Oliver broke that cycle and helped ensure that justice was served. If you know someone who's been targeted by romance scams, or if you're worried about a friend or family member who seems to be in a relationship that doesn't make sense, don't stay silent. Reach out, ask questions, offer support without judgment. The isolation that scammers create is one of their most powerful weapons, and it can only be broken by people who care enough to stay connected even when it's difficult. Make sure you subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell because stories like Oliver's are more common than you might think. And knowledge is the best protection against becoming a victim yourself. Leave a comment telling me about the biggest red flag you noticed in Oliver's story. Or share if you've ever had to help someone escape from a manipulative relationship. Your insights might help someone else recognize danger before it's too late. Remember, falling for a scam doesn't make you stupid or weak. It makes you human. But learning from these experiences, sharing them openly, and supporting each other through recovery, that's what makes us strong.